Welcome to the 2017 Harvest Press Conference. We're in Napa Valley at Frog's Leap Winery, the heart of Rutherford and the heart of the American wine industry here in the Napa Valley. And I've got some experts here to talk to you about what we've experienced this year and what we expect out of the 2017 vintage. Rory Williams, who is the winemaker, assistant winemaker at Frog's Leap Winery, Oscar Renteria with Renteria Vineyard Management, Meaghan Becker with Quintessa. And we're here to answer your questions. You can type them into the live stream, but we have a lot to talk about, at least for 10 minutes. And I'd like to start with kind of what an interesting year it's been. It's been just hurry up and wait to some extent. It's been wild. We had a bunch of water and then a perfect spring and a hot summer. And so I'm sure everybody is eager to hear how that's going to affect the wines in the bottle. Rory, do you want to just kind of paint us a picture of what the spring was like? And
yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we're at the Harvest Conference right now, and but really the year for us starts with the winter rains that came over the 2016-2017 winter. And the story with that, I think, for everybody was lots of it, lots of water. Pretty much every month this winter we had above average rainfall, and we had some record-breaking rainfall during certain months of the year. Easily the whole county was 150% of normal. There were some spots that had twice the average rainfall, especially up against the western hills. So we had a lot of water. That somewhat delayed the start of the year compared to last year, but it actually set us more along our long-term averages in terms of when we started with pruning and when we started with bud break, when bloom started. So the whole year kind of got delayed slightly by from the previous years of drought and less rainfall, but it allowed us to get back to somewhat of a more normal schedule for those vines. The water in the soil, lots of soil moisture, kind of slowed the vines down, told them to get going just a little bit later compared to last year.
And did you all have reservoirs full and plenty of water?
Full levels
throughout the valley?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a huge lake in the middle of Quintessa, and it filled up really nicely, which was wonderful for what we got later on in the season.
But didn't that create some extra growth in the cover crops?
Yeah, so we had great cover crop growth. You know, there was some standing water during the heaviest rain events. Even the best well-drained soils on the benchlands and the valley floors got saturated with water fairly quickly. I think something that was exceptional, despite it being the wettest winter we've had in 30 years and the third wettest in over 100 years, there was actually no major flooding in the valley. There wasn't any destructive flooding, which was a welcome change for sure. But that definitely, we got great cover crop growth early on, and then once the vines got going, they got going very, very quickly, and we had tremendous canopy growth early on in the season. And
bloom and set, which are key points in our vantage point for the rest of the year. What was that like for maybe all of you? Yeah, so bloom and set were just like bud break, delayed slightly from last year, but welcome change from the previous few years where we've had actually, despite all the warmth in the previous years, we've actually had historically cold Mays in the past. This year we had a beautiful May. Any frost? No frost at all. We had a couple nights where we ran wind machines, but no real dangerous events, which lines up with the previous years. But instead, we just had a perfect May. It was warm, seasonably warm temperatures, no wind, no frost, nothing that would affect the grapes in a negative way. What did you see, Oscar, in terms of bloom, set, frost, that spring season?
Not a lot of variables, not a lot of variance, which is great to have that. And so it's nice and smooth. I mean, we did have to mow the lawn a couple more times and change our tactics with floor management, but a welcome challenge, pretty easy to handle.
And Meaghan?
And we were just down the road from here, so not too far. So very similar conditions. Couldn't have asked for anything better. Yeah.
Great. Well, and then, the canopy growth was quite, that took a lot of work, I know. And then we had some heat, right? And so when you were making those decisions about how to shape your canopies, talk to me about that, what that was like. Did you see the heat coming? Were you prepared?
Well, you're never really 100% prepared for anything, but certainly I think it was fortuitous that we would have the month of June with the start of about 2 to 3 days of good heat, and in July we had about 4 of over 100 degrees, and then started to acclimate to those high heats. So by the time we got to the first week of September, which was a lot of heat, I think vines were pretty acclimated. And of course, I think that was an early warning system for us to adjust our canopies. A lot of shade cloth out there, a lot of people cutting laterals instead of removing. So tactics about opening up canopies, getting some air ventilation, but not being over excessive was certainly an early warning sign. So pretty lucky.
So what are the strategies that growers employ with protecting the fruit from heat
So one
or direct sunlight?
Yeah, one big strategy we have is to leave leaves, not de-leaf the afternoon side of the vines. By that it means when the temperatures are hottest is when the sun is going over the western hills, hitting hitting the grapevines with the hottest temperatures. If you have exposed fruit out there, they're put into the greatest danger. So we don't touch one side of the vine at all, whereas the other side of the vine is very much opened up, leafed, allowed for good airflow to helps control fungal diseases and things like that.
What else?
Yeah, and if you think about that, the pretty aggressive rapid growth that we had in the spring going into the summer is the fact that we were able to try to justify at that time you're making your irrigation strategies.
Yeah.
And so it's surprising, I think, to many how full the fill levels were in July to start that. And so we've been pretty fortunate with exponential growth. So a little bit more management of the canopy, but just
how much of your property that you manage or own do you put shade cloth on?
Now it's about 15%, quite more than we ever have in the past. Yeah, by far.
Do you use it, Rory?
We don't use any shade cloth. We rely on those. We have a split canopy that helps shade that afternoon side, and that's really where we find the most danger is on that side. We don't have a lot of fruit that's exposed on the morning side.
So we had somewhere between 10 and 20 days over 100 degrees, this season, and that doesn't count all the days at 99, right?
Yeah.
So, and the interesting thing about that September week was the extended heat. I think that the vines are accustomed to the 3 or 4 days of heat, and then the fog comes in. But this was 7, 8 days of nonstop heat. Did you see anything different about that, or in your approaches this year to manage that extended heat than you've done in the past?
Well, I think we were pretty fortunate to have all that soil moisture that we did
Yeah.
from it was definitely a blessing this in July and August and into September to still have soil moisture
And the humidity helped.
and the humidity to help balance out, some pretty brutal weather. We had that couple day stretch above, for us up in Rutherford, we hit 114. That's hot.
Wow.
That's
What does that mean for the inside of the grape?
Well, the grapes are essentially just like humans. They're trying to protect themselves at that point. So they're going to draw water out of the grapes to help keep themselves alive and try to basically sustain themselves through that. It's sort of like us having to drink water. And adequate soil moisture really, really helps that because it allows the vines to try to compensate for some of that moisture loss by taking it up from the soil. Part of the problem is that when you reach 114 degrees, there's no vine, no matter how much you're irrigating or how much soil moisture is down there, the vines simply can't take up enough rapidly enough. And so you're really hoping for some cold nights and for some relief from that. Unfortunately, we did have some warm mornings. I think that was, for me, that was the story of the summer, was waking up every morning with my jacket on and then realizing I had to take it off at 6 o'clock in the morning.
You were on vacation in Florida. Yeah,
exactly.
But they bounce back, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing is that the grapes bounce back. And
Grapevines are resilient.
Great quality. Yeah.
Grapevines are resilient.
Right.
They're going to protect themselves, and when you have this kind of energy in the soil, you've got the water in our tactics and what we do. I mean, we spoil, and we care for these vines in a different way, and so they're ready to take on the heat.
So Oscar, you serve on the Napa Valley Farm Worker Foundation Board of Directors, and on everyone's mind this summer were people too, right? The heat. We have to employ different strategies for how we manage crews and what people's schedules are and how many people we need and all of that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what that landscape looks like.
Well, so far so good. I mean, we've started off with our first 3 weeks of harvest that we had. We've harvested more fruit in 3 weeks than we had since 2003. I mean, so we're able to meet that challenge. And I think it's been very interesting that Napa has that ability to still to have that labor available and that supply. I mean, it's not easy, but I think the things we do make a difference.
Things like what? How do we retain?
Well, certainly the kind of training that we offer. The people know the culture that we try to we try to always adhere to in Napa with us, especially with our management company, is just treating everybody really well and paying them really well, and they're being paid extremely well right now.
And they're working a lot.
Oh yeah, they're making good money. I mean, so far so good.
Yeah.
It's been a great season for them.
And so when there are high temps, what are the rules about? I mean, you start at night, you start earlier, right? I mean, so you're trying to keep people working in the cool hours. What are some other things that you do to keep people comfortable?
Well, for us, it's starting as early as possible, and not picking too late. Instead, we have our full-time crew. We know how much we can pick in a given amount of time, and being able to design our days that we're not picking into the late morning, especially during that heat wave where we were getting temperatures at 90 degrees at 9:30 in the morning. You better not be out there at 90. You cannot pick in 90-degree weather. It's not helpful to anybody, and so designing your harvest around that, and that's part of what we do every year is reacting to what's coming, and that's really it's the story is the heat wave this year, but there's always a story during harvest. There's always something you have to a challenge you have to meet.
Absolutely, and we all go into the season prepared. Plenty of shade that we can move around in the vineyards, and lots of water, of course. Great training for the team before the heat really hits, so everyone knows what the safe practices are.
Yeah. So Meaghan, what's your harvest looking like so far? Is it hurry up and wait for you too?
It is. It absolutely is. So, I think harvest for us really took a pause right after kind of the first week of September. After the heat, over the Labor Day weekend, we had this beautiful couple of weeks of very cool weather, which has been ideal. I mean, it's really given us some extra time to leave the vines and let the fruit hang, which really helps to develop some really complex flavors, and which is what you're looking for a fine wine. So at this point, all of our Sauvignon Blanc is in, of course, but we're only about 10% in terms of our reds from the estate. But this week, with the warmer weather approaching, we were just talking about this, it's going to be a lot of momentum this week. So by the end of the week, we'll probably be well over a third done. So it's going to be a big week, and I'm sure you guys are seeing the same.
Already.
What about you, Oscar? How much have you brought in?
We brought in about half of what we farm out of about 1,900 acres, and but here comes the next storm, the red one, the one that most people are focusing on. And there we go.
And what does it look like? What are the projections about? Obviously, the quality is excellent, but what about the quantity for this year? What do you think about crop load? Well,
we were just talking about this earlier. I think a lot of it depends on the type of vineyard you have, and how strong they are and how they made it through the heat waves. So for us, I think looking at some of the really strong blocks, they're actually performing really well and delivering probably at or slightly above average. In the blocks that might be a little bit younger, that might have struggled through the heat a little bit, you might see a little bit below average. So it's really very dependent on how the vineyards did through kind of the heat that we got.
Exactly.
So Meaghan, you're in the market a lot. What are the kinds of things that you're telling people about the 2017 growing season and harvest?
Well, I tell everyone that it's a vintage that's really had us at the edge of our seats since day one, pretty much, right? I feel like we've been talking about a lot this season. I mean, I guess every season, but this year it feels like there were some really big moments. We talked about the water that we got. We talked about the canopy growth, the heat waves. So it was kind of one thing after the other. For me, though, the story's not really about each of those individual events. It's really kind of how the story is being weaved together, and it's actually telling, I think for me, a pretty compelling story about this vintage and what we're getting. Without the water early on, we wouldn't have made it through the heat. And right after the heat, we got cool weather right when we wanted it. So it actually all lined up quite nicely for us, I think. Not easy. You certainly had to stay on top of it, but I think you actually had all the stuff to make for a great vintage, and we're super hopeful.
Yeah. And what are the questions that you get out there about workforce and those kinds of issues? Because we see a lot this year in the press that there's this focus on a labor shortage or on something, and that's part of why we created the Farm Worker Foundation, right? Is to bring that professional development up several levels and retain a full-time year-round workforce, which is clearly the direction that Napa's been heading in for a long time and will continue to. But what are the kinds of questions that you get out there about?
Well, I think people are just curious, and usually they're very surprised to find out all the programs we have that go into education and training as well as housing for our workforce. I think people are always pleasantly surprised and happy to hear about kind of everything that we're investing in this community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are surprised to find that that the labor situation, at least in Napa Valley, has really moved away from a mercenary standpoint, where we really are thinking about things less in terms of these discrete actions that happen at certain points of the year, and more in terms of full-time employment, total annual compensation, including vacation and health insurance, as opposed to just an hourly wage. And I think it's a difference in thought that lines up with the way that the vines think as well, that the vines grow and adapt over the entire year, and thinking about the whole system holistically.
And the demographic is changing, right, in the vineyard workforce community. I mean, Oscar, I think you've said you employ 25% females now?
Almost 35 now.
Almost 35%. And 10 years ago?
4 years ago it was less than 5.
Right. And they're coming to this industry and this occupation because?
Thank God.
Yeah.
And there's a necessity, and there's a great opportunity, and doing great work.
Yeah.
Thank God for females.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Napa's always changing, and we're always working on what's next and what's better. So at this point, we can take some questions from the live stream. So driving around, I see many vineyards being replanted. Why is this? That's true. And just driving up this morning, I noticed several that are newly being redeveloped. Can you talk to us about the replanting that's going on right now in the county?
Yeah, I mean, we are in the middle of quite a bit of redevelopment at Quintessa as well. We planted in 1990, so the vineyards are getting to be of an age where it's time, and we've learned a lot of new things over the last few decades, which we can now put into practice. Changing row orientations, which will help with these heat spikes during the summer or late summer. Really kind of making sure that we have a good understanding of how the vines did in those spots and how we can keep improving. So I think certainly there's an opportunity to keep improving quality and address some of the issues we might have seen over the last few decades.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like investment is at a high here?
Optimistically, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got a good question here. What do growers do after harvest?
Sleep. And drink a little beer.
Well, on that note, I thought it would be appropriate if we recognized the 2017 harvest with some wine that was just pulled from the barrel, and Rory can tell us what this is briefly, and we'll... This
is some newly fermenting Cabernet Sauvignon from our Rossi vineyard on the west side of Rutherford. So just started fermenting, a little bit frothy. Maybe needs some filtration.
Just a little.
Well, it looks great. Thanks to all of you for sharing your perspective, and thanks to you for watching. Cheers to the 2017 harvest.
Cheers.
Cheers.